Welcome to another episode of Inside Out, the series that looks at the changes we need to make internally in order to bring about more productive and happier working lives. Changing our own perception of our everyday life in the process, and we argue also bringing about effects in the external world which mirrors the changes that we're making on the inside. We talked last week about 3 key tools as we go through this journey: the mind, the body, and the subconscious. We looked at how the mind is a powerful tool, but in some cases, for example, our attempts to give up smoking or to give up chocolate cake or to go to the gym every day or to go on a diet proves to be no match for the needs and cravings of the body or the beliefs embedded in the subconscious. So let's look at those beliefs today, and we'll come back to the subconscious next week and in the following week, because there are a few simple things we need to understand. Let's demystify, first of all, the word, a word that's used often in connection with psychiatry, with Freud, with Jung, with psychology, and therefore we treat the word with some awe and maybe too much respect. For our purposes, in very simple layman's terms, what we need to understand about the subconscious is this. It's a very blunt instrument, a very early part of our cerebral evolution, whose primary purpose is to help us survive, to protect us. And therefore the subconscious will always drive us towards pleasure, however we as individuals conceive, and however our subconscious conceives of that pleasure, and away from pain. So at all times of the day, your subconscious is helping you to flee from what it perceives as suffering and towards what it perceives as pleasure. Now, for some people, that pleasure may be a cigarette, for example. The subconscious isn't a doctor. It doesn't make a distinction between what's healthy and what's unhealthy in medical terms. Neither is it able to look into the future, because it's a very primitive part of us, and foresee the consequences of our actions. For some people, that first cigarette they ever had created and crystallized an association between pleasure and smoking. How cool they looked with all their friends, how it made them part of the in crowd. That might not be your experience. It certainly wasn't mine. I've never smoked in my life, not even tried. But for so many people in France, in Spain, where I live, and across the world, smoking helps them become part of the in crowd and gives them a feeling of being grown up, of being sophisticated, of being cool. The subconscious will then form an association which will become a belief about smoking. And once that is ingrained and the subconscious has taken it into its primitive system, well, then it'll constantly push people to crave another cigarette because that constitutes pleasure. Whereas giving up constitutes pain, may well be healthier, but the subconscious doesn't care. So at various stages, especially in the most formative years of our early lives, our subconscious will look at all kinds of phenomena around us, from the way couples live together, to food, to health, to work, to money, and will begin to make associations between that stimulus and pleasure or pain. If a child grows up in a household where people are constantly worrying about money or complaining about rich people or generally negative about money, then obviously the child is likely to form an association between money and pain and will likely have problems with money later in life. It might look at its parents and see a loving couple and therefore form a very positive association between the stimulus, between a couple, and the idea of happiness, and will seek a couple later in life and enjoy more productive and healthier relationships. Now, obviously, we're simplifying vastly here, but it's important to bear that in mind about the subconscious. Early on in life, it'll make these associations, which will then crystallize at a certain point in time and become beliefs. And during the years, not only of our childhood or even our adolescence, but of our adult life, those beliefs stocked in the subconscious, like an old cassette stuck in a tape recorder, will play and play and play. And in fact, 95% of our daily lives are run on a kind of automatic program. I'm not only talking about, obviously, the functions we're not even aware of, like breathing, like digestion, but I'm talking about the thoughts, the patterns, the ways we have of going through our day. 95% of it is programmed by our subconscious and our body. Only 5% of it is really conscious, in the sense that we are thinking new thoughts, fresh thoughts about what we want to do. The vast majority of our lives are habitual. And so, if the subconscious is this instrument driving us towards pleasure, away from pain, if it takes as its information everything that we've stocked in our childhood about pleasure and pain in association with certain stimuli, then it follows that the vast majority of our lives were driven far more by our subconscious than by what we see as our very rational, intellectual minds. That creates potentially a conflict until the two are aligned. If the subconscious and the mind are aligned, then of course you'll go out and do what you want to do. Your subconscious will validate that, saying, yes, I think that's going to lead to pleasure. Then you're going to be in a much more aligned position, and you're going to achieve what it is you set out to achieve, which is why there are so many successful people in sports, in business, in the arts, in many fields. And they don't necessarily think in these terms, but this is what's happening. The subconscious and the body both working in alignment with the mind. So that's all for this week about that aspect of the subconscious. We'll come back next week and look at the body and how it interacts with the subconscious. And then we'll see again what a powerful force the two constitute against the tiny mind that we're so proud of. But bearing in mind that in future there are ways that we can adopt and put into practice to create greater alignment between all three. That's all for this week. Speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.